Hello, everyone. I am so excited today. This Flabebe has been really fun so far, and I love it. And I want to talk about animals because I was thinking about animals, which is what normal people do. I was thinking about an idea I had where it's like a community sort of Animal Crossing style game, but it has to do with the ocean and just ocean animals are so cool, guys. So I want to talk about them a little bit. They're also just like land animals that can do so many cool things. And that's amazing to me because I feel like if you heard about a bird that can imitate human speech, for example, or specific sounds, you'd go, wow, that must be a supernatural creature. No, crows and ravens can just do that. Or if you heard about like a lizard that can convert light into energy, you'd go, "Whoa, that sounds like a Pokemon." But they're real life animals that can do that. I want to say it's a variety of salamander. I don't remember what it's called, but it's so cool. Do you guys know that much about sea cucumbers? I first heard about them in a Loxton video, and since then I've been like, how is that even possible? This thing seems like an alien. They can spit out their internal organs. They do that to like scare animals chasing them because most animals don't do that, so they kind of freak out and run away. And then they can just regrow their guts in like a day. Isn't that cool? Or how sea stars can spit out their stomachs. Getting a stitch mark real quick. Most animals cannot do that. I know lots of people hype up octopuses, but they're cool to me because they have so many different like abilities. Like they can camouflage, they can do jet propulsion, they can do ink, they can like squish into different small spaces because they don't have any bones. Like any of those, if like a superhero had them, you'd be like, whoa, that's such cool power. And there's this small little animal that has like six of them at once. The universe probably didn't plan this out, but it's kind of funny to me to imagine that that's why they have such short lifespans. I think most octopuses only live for about a year, because if they lived any longer, they'd like take over the ocean. They already throw things at other animals. It appears just for fun. They live in little villages. They can open jars. If like if they had longer lifespans, they'd be like OP. I think that's why you see them a lot inspiring like animals or eldritch creatures is because a lot of times those live longer and then you can make them scarier. I'm not sure I would want to do that, but it could be fun to talk about. I will almost wonder if I could split up their abilities between different like creatures that I created. Like maybe one of them can camouflage, one of them can spit out water to move quickly. I think it could be fun to use my own like fantasy story to focus on things that do happen in the real world, even if a lot of it is fantastical. Because I think a lot of times it's easy to forget just how like crazy the things that happen in the real world are. There are some birds that can even sleep in the sky, I think. This is a series that takes place mainly on the seashore. Obviously, I don't want to focus on land animals too much, but you do see birds. So I think it could be fun to have like supernatural bird creatures, or the birds there can just do seemingly crazy things like imitate human speech or like hunt without ever leaving the air. It's like, no, birds can just do that. Something I was learning a little about recently is seaweed isn't technically considered a weed, it's more like an algae. Because strictly speaking, it's not a plant as we classify them. Things exist and then humans put them into little categories. And I don't know too much about it, but I want to learn more about how that works. Because obviously, real world seaweed is not really sapient to my knowledge, but it could be fun to have like something that looks like a plant, but it's alive. And in this story that takes place in a fantasy ocean-esque world, maybe it's aware, maybe it's listening, maybe it's thinking. Kelp forests are also really interesting because they're carbon sinks. They do a bunch of other stuff too, but it's amazing to me just how much of one specific chemical they can absorb. And that can get really into the nitty-gritty, so I'm not sure if a lot of people would find that interesting to read about, but it could be fun to talk about, like, maybe there's some kind of magical pollution happening, but there's this one kind of algae that eats it, like part of the food web. Something else I was learning about recently in my astronomy class is dark matter, where we don't really know what it is, but we know something's out there. We know something is pulling the galaxy into its spiral shape, and it's not the only thing doing that, obviously. But our galaxy, for example, has a very specific spiral shape, even though it's been hanging out for so long that it probably should have drifted a little bit right now. Only some kind of gravitational force is holding it together. And we don't know what that is yet. And I wonder if I could tie that into how some people see the ocean is we don't know that much about it. We don't know exactly what's going on down there. We haven't explored that much of it, but something's out there. Obviously, in the real world, we understand water okay. But recently, I've been thinking if this is a fantasy world and you can do whatever you want, does it have to be just like normal water? Or could it be something we don't understand? Maybe it's some kind of magical substance. In one of the Brandon Sanderson books, I think there's a whole ocean made of pollen, which is crazy. Not in a negative way. Like, I think that's really cool and creative. It could be interesting to have like an island or a series of islands, and that's where humans live. That's what they understand. like how in the real world we have our solar system. That's what we have, and everything else is just around us. And they know there's like something keeping them there, but they don't know what it is. The animals all live in something, but they don't know what it is. I wonder if I could even connect that to how the ocean is like 70% of the Earth, and the area that humans live on is pretty small. It's a bit like how, as much as 95% of the Milky Way, I think, is made of dark matter, and we don't know what it is. Like most of the mass, not just in our galaxy, but in most galaxies at least, is something that we do not know and can barely even detect. We can't even see it directly. We can only deduce that something's there because of how it interacts with other objects. And that's super interesting to me. In the real world, when you're like looking at the reflection of the night sky on the ocean, for example, it can almost look like they're blending together. And that's something I might dig into with this story idea. I kind of imagine there being almost a sphere, like how people used to think we were surrounded by literal spheres that the stars were part of. And that's filled with this water lake substance. And people don't know what that is. It might look like the ocean, but it also kind of fades into the sky and it's just here. I imagine it almost like a loop. Like if you go far enough down to the bottom of the ocean, you eventually get spit back out at like the sky and then you fall back down. I think this might be easier to explain with a picture. 2, 3, 4, 5. Checking to make sure I have the right number. I initially imagined this in more of a mundane ocean setting, but I really like the idea of being more creative with it. It's not something I've really done before. So it's fun to think about, like, maybe this is what, like, people are surrounded by, like, this magical sort of sphere, and they don't really know what it's filled with, and they don't really know what it's floating in either. Like, we know that the universe is expanding. We don't know what it's expanding into. I don't really think it's expanding into anything, but I also am not an expert. It's fun to think about like alien locations that aren't necessarily just space. Um, I didn't really think to describe it like this initially. I couldn't put my finger on it. But once a little while ago, I saw someone describing Area Zero from Pokemon Scarlet and Violet as alien. Like it genuinely feels like an alien location. And that's super cool to me because I knew it felt like kind of forbidding. It felt different. It felt otherworldly. I just couldn't think how to describe it. And that's super interesting to me because it's still on like whatever the Pokemon version of Earth is. You're going down into the Earth instead of up into space. But like the terrain's getting weirder. You don't recognize any of the animals. There's these mysterious crystals, and it's super cool to me. I wouldn't necessarily say all that was played out super well, like, the whole thing with Terapagos and plot holes and Paradox Pokemon has been talked to death, but that's just so cool to me, the idea of going somewhere that seems familiar and instead you find, like, there's an alien here, reality is being warped, something like that. I don't personally really like exploring caves in real life because I feel like they'll, like, squish me. I know it logically doesn't make any sense, it's just a thing that happens. But that's something that could be fun to write about. I think rocks and minerals are really cool. I have a main character that I was originally going to make a geologist, but that doesn't really make sense for the story anymore. So it could be fun to reuse that idea one day. In Area Zero's case, the Pokemon aren't necessarily aliens. I was talking to my brother about this once, and he thinks they're from alternate timelines, not necessarily like this version of the Pokemon world's past and future. But it's cool to me because they still feel alien. They don't look like something that exists on the Pokemon world anymore. I think I said this about jellyfish once. They don't look like normal animals because they're hundreds of millions of years old. It's something another thing I was learning about with the structure of galaxies and stuff today, is if you look back in time effectively, which is what you can do with the universe itself is a sort of time machine, which is insanely cool. The further back you look, the more like your regular galaxies look. They don't A lot of very young structures in the universe don't necessarily have a very defined shape. This is when elements were first forming. Imagine like the first hydrogen and helium forming, and it's just crashing together and forming into blobs like Play-Doh. It's just kind of there. I'm looking for a needle. It reminds me of how early life on Earth is just like microbes, sub like single-celled organisms that just kind of look like blobs. And that's something that could be really fun to explore. There are already creatures on Earth like sub sea cucumbers. I don't know how old those are that are super weird. But if you look even farther back, things just get even weirder, at least to us, because things hadn't figured out what they wanted to be yet. There's a lot of random combinations and permutations. So that's something that could also be fun to explore in a story is like maybe some organisms or structures are just sticking around from the early parts of the universe, much like with galaxies. And we can look at them and we can go, oh, that's what galaxies look like when the universe was only a couple hundred million years old, which is a crazy amount of time for humans. For astronomy, that is baby. We can kind of go, even if this is part of our universe, this looks super alien. This isn't something we really recognize because it's new to us. Okay, we got to do this next part now. Next stitch after marker. Okay. Okay. One of the driving ideas I have for this seafaring story is it's super fun to learn and explore about stuff. I get why people like doing that, but there's also a lot of stuff you don't get. And you see that all the time in astronomy. So I wonder if that's something that would be worth emphasizing. For example, I would probably end the story without ever figuring out what the quote unquote dark matter is. There's some stuff we don't know. Like it almost reminds me of negative space in a painting. Like there's just stuff that we don't know. It there's a lot of empty space in space, obviously. And that's even more like the parts where nothing is painted, but you get the idea. And maybe there's a bunch of stuff that we can find out from looking at super early organisms, but there's also a lot of stuff that just doesn't add up, at least not at the time that the story takes place. You know what else I learned? Scientists are dramatic. Y'all need to cool it. Today I was learning about how some larger galaxies will essentially absorb smaller ones. And it is kind of like eating, but how this has been described by scientists is they call these bigger galaxies galactic cannibals. And that's where I'm like, bro, chill. They're not even alive. They're just cosmic phenomena. It's not that deep. I think sometimes scientists are just having fun though, and that's cool. That's something I like. I wonder if they're compared to living things just to make them easier to understand. But I feel comparing them directly to animals or humans that are eating their same species is overdoing it a little bit. Jellies already look so alien. I think I want to find some way to include them in this seafaring story. And I don't necessarily want them to be completely unaltered because that's just like real life. At that point, I could just write about real life. But it could be fun to have these creatures that they don't really make noises, they don't have a brain, and they look like they're just kind of floating. Because jellies aren't actually doing nothing out there. They are actually pretty effective swimmers for their class of organisms. But to us, they look almost like ghosts. I think that's why they get compared to ghosts a lot. They're just kind of floating endlessly, wandering. A little while ago, I learned that the Portuguese manowar is not actually a jelly, but a siphonophore. And in my eyes, that makes it even cooler because siphonophores are crazy. They're like a hive mind. Maybe I could have that be a discovery in the story. Like, we've been studying this mysterious jelly-like creature for years, and it turns out to actually be a bunch of tiny creatures that move and think as one. It almost reminds me of a flock of birds, but if they were all connected. I wonder how much of this you could study from observing the animals after they've died. That's not something I know too much about. Because for a long time, people must have had to do that, right? We didn't always have the technology to like go deep in the ocean and observe this stuff in person. And I don't think that's still super common today because, it's not an easy job going to the bottom of the ocean and looking at stuff. There's a lot of mud there. One of my college professors has actually been to the bottom of the ocean, and that was how he said it. There's a lot of mud. But you can find like whale carcasses, and sometimes they explode because they're filled with gases. That's something that happens with a giant siphonophore too, and I really wanna explore that. I think it's really cool. They're filled with gas, and it only stays put inside their body because they live down at the bottom of the ocean where there's so much pressure on top of them, so it's squishing the gas in place. This is also the case for whales. So when they float up to the surface of the water, if they do that, gas expands and they pop. That's why some whale bodies, like, explode once they wash up on the earth is because nothing's compressing the gas anymore. Isn't that crazy? I think they only function as well as they do in the water because it's, like, buoyant too. Because 'cause they're so heavy. Whales are so huge and heavy, like, if they came up to the surface or on land, then their organs would just get squished by, like, the weight of all the other organs on top of them and everything else in their body. Isn't that insane? I think these scissors are dying because 'cause I've had them for years and years, and I have to cut things, like, multiple times just to get it to work now. I wonder what the reason is behind people putting, like, whales in space, because I see that all the time, and I wonder if some of that is just, like, the ocean kinda reminds people of space. I know they're very intelligent. I wonder if that has to do with it. So are dolphins. They're just well, they don't exactly have morals, neither do most animals. That's how nature is, except for humans. But dolphins will like intentionally toss small creatures into the air, like and like kill them just for fun. I wonder if I could explore that in this space ocean story, kind of like finding it would kind of be like finding life in space that is intelligent enough to play by harming others. or showing malice. I don't think we found that. I think if we find anything, at least anytime soon, it's just going to be like microbes. But there's still a lot of stuff you can learn from that. I think why humans are so relatively unique, at least as far as we know in the universe, is just because it's hard to get to us. Like so many little things have to go perfectly right to create life at all. And then all these other crazy things have to happen just to keep the conditions for life and water especially going. And then how is it going to get intelligent? How does evolution work? Well, it depends on the terrain of the planet. How would you even get to humans? Like humans can't live in the super cold. That's the only reason more humans don't live in the Arctic. Lots of planets, the Antarctic, lots of planets are super, super cold because space very cold. So we don't think it's impossible that there's more like intelligent life out there. I think it's just very, very rare. I don't know exactly like how many creatures there are in the oceans too, but they probably outnumber humans, right? This is actually not something I know too much about. But it is kind of like space, how the oceans are really big. They wrap around most of the Earth, like how most of the space is empty. And then there's just us in our little home. All right. Second ear done. They're so big, they almost remind me of little bunny ears, but they also look like little sakura petals, kind of. Okay, so next we're going to make the crown. This is what I said looked like pollen. I think we might be making popcorns, which is not literally a popcorn, obviously, but there's this technique you can do in crochet that creates a shape that kind of looks like a popped corn, and that's just what it's called now. Two, three. Let me count real quick. Okay, I think that should be it. Let me see if I remember how to do this. This might take a minute. Hmm. This explanation is confusing, so I'm gonna go get one of my crochet books real quick. This isn't something I can do a lot because of light pollution, but it's really cool to look at pictures of the night sky where it's like completely dark and you can see so many stars. It's really amazing. And I think that must be why so many people have been looking at it. Like for all of history, people have been looking up at the sky. We have stories about it. Like so many cultures have their own version of the Milky Way story. Like now I know why it's called the Milky Way, and I'm never going to be the same. Or we use them to navigate. And we look at the ocean and we don't like it's hard to cross. Maybe we don't know what's on the other side of it. It's really fun to think about that, and it makes me feel kind of connected to all the other people who must have explored this stuff. Okay. I've done this kind of thing before, just not in a while, so I'm making sure to remember everything. Okay, that wasn't quite right. Yeah, it almost looks like a braid. Basically, what this is saying to do is to do 4 double crochet stitches into the same chain and then kinda put them together. But I think that actually wouldn't work with the number of chains we hold on. Sis says do double crochet in the third chain from the hook. Pull through the first 2 loops and leave 2 loops on the hook. But after you're done a double crochet, you only have 1 loop left. I don't know. You see what it's like this? Like start another one? Okay, now I have 3 loops on the hook like it says. Okay, now it says do a double crochet in the next chain. Okay. says to pull through the first two loops and leave four loops on the hook. Double crochet in the same stitch. First two loops. Yarn over and pull through all five loops. Okay, that makes more sense. I think I used to know what this is called. I've done this kind of stitch before, but I don't remember what it is. You know what I didn't know existed until recently? Neutrinos. I don't understand it super well yet, but it's really fun to learn about antimatter. I never really got what it was before. Okay, I think I get it now. I don't actually know that many ocean animals, so it's something I want to learn more about, especially as you get really deep down. I know that's a part that lots of people compare to deep space because things there look so alien. They don't look like anything we're used to as humans. Our nautilus is still around. For some reason, I think they're extinct, but I might be thinking of something else. Those are so cool to me because they have different chambers within their shells, and they can like change what's in the chambers, and that decides how much they float or not. Isn't that cool? That seems like so intelligent. It reminds me of like I don't know exactly how boats work, but I'm pretty sure people do things like that with boats and submarines. They're like, how fast do we want to go? How much do we want to sink? They have to decide all that. I don't know how they do it yet either, but recently I learned that seagulls can turn salt water into fresh water inside their body. And I think I've brought that up before on here, but I want to mention it because like that's something humans have a hard time with is filtering water. Like fresh water is super important for us, but it's not always easy. And seagulls can just do it. Hold on. I don't know exactly what depth spider crabs live at, but those are so cool to me too. They almost look like rock formations. Obviously, they look kind of like spiders. They remind me of like twigs or branches, how they just jut out in different directions and they look almost random. That's so cool. I wonder, why do people call that one kind of fish the butterfly fish? Does it look like a butterfly? Because I know there's a Pokemon based on it, and it's meant to look more like a butterfly, but I haven't actually seen the real thing. Would you guys be interested in doing like a research stream where we just like look at animals and learn new stuff and talk about them? Because I think that would be really fun. People like to joke about things evolving into crabs. It's just like an effective shape, as far as I understand. But I wonder if it could be fun to give some of these creatures like crab-like elements and basically go, look, they look like this because it works well, but we don't know why it works well. I mean, obviously, in real life, we kind of get why it works well. But if we were like in space and there was a bunch of aliens that all looked similar and we don't even know what's in space half the time, we'd be like, what is happening? What's going on here? Something that's especially interesting to me is you can make at least a rough guess at how old stars are just by their color. I always thought it'd be more complicated than that. Like a lot of hot, bright, and young stars tend to be bluer. If they're older and bigger, I think, then they're like reddish. Even if they're not completely red, they tend to be more of a reddish orange. And that's why you see a lot of elliptical galaxies being more orangish, is they're filled with older stars. Meanwhile, spiral galaxies tend to look blue because they have lots of young stars. This says I should have 10 small balls when I've done this. I'm only going to have six. I don't know what it's talking about, but we'll see if it fits. This also says to end on a slip stitch, and that didn't happen. I also just slip stitch in the same one. Oh, okay. I think a lot of people expect crocheting to be really exact and serious, but it's always kind of just worked out for me. Trying to fit this with this a little bit. Yeah, these don't look like little balls. They just look flat. Even though I did just what it said. Shocker. Maybe I should just make popcorns because I think that might look better. Yeah, see, it looks so flat. So I'm supposed to chain 32, but somehow end up with 10 small balls, which didn't work. I wonder if I could just make 10 popcorns and then go from there. No. Sometimes you have to improvise. This is basically me with baking. Even though baking is known for being more precise, like it's never caused huge problems for me when I just kind of adjust as I go. Like the most that's ever happened to me is I'm not very good at making brownies, but that might just be because I have to work with different ingredients than usual. Okay. Okay. So that's a popcorn. See how it does? It's super blurry on camera, but you see how it does look more like a popped corn kernel? That's what I thought we were making. That actually looks like a little ball of pollen. I'm not sure. I think we can just do like slip stitches between these, if anything. Stars are really beautiful too, and I think that's it seems kind of obvious, but I think that's another reason why so many people like to look at them is just they're amazing. They almost remind me of jewels. There are creatures in the ocean that are like bioluminescent, so it could be fun to have them look like stars from far away. It doesn't look super good with the slip stitches in the middle, but maybe I'm just overthinking. Should I just skip a stitch? Would that look strange? I could try it. I think from far away, like angler lures, those probably look like stars. I'm gonna try skipping a stitch between these and see how it looks, and if it doesn't work, I'll go back and fix it. Maybe maybe put a chain between them. That doesn't look as good, so yeah, I think I'll stick with single crochet. Slip stitches. You guys know sharks? I don't know that much about them, but I was learning a little about them recently. And I think they're interesting because there's so many different kinds. They can be so different. Like when I was a little kid, I didn't know that much about them. So I kind of thought there was just like great whites and hammerheads. But then some of them have really cute names like lemon shark or nurse shark. And some of them can take perfectly circular bites. That's just a thing that happens in nature. So it's something I'm very curious about. I think the main theorized reason for why a lot of sharks have like a dark back and a lighter underbelly is because it's camouflage for in the deep sea, you know. If you're swimming underneath of them, you look up, you just see another like pale spot, you might think, oh, that's just the top of the ocean. That's just what the top of the ocean looks like. Nope, it's a shark. Or if you're above it, you might look down at it and go like, oh, another dark patch. Wow, bottom of the ocean sure is dark. But nope, it's an animal. I've seen reconstructions of the megalodon too, where they give it almost like stripes. And I think what that's meant to represent is when there's like light filtering through the ocean and it's kind of shining through the grasses and it's making shadows that look almost like their own blades of grass or tiger stripes. Do you guys know about stromatolites? I don't know a ton about them, but they might be a kind of missing link, which is I think is a bit of a misleading way to put it. You don't think there's any like one specific link that led from things not being alive to things being alive, but they're like creatures that exist, and there's chemicals, and it's kind of like how living things need to convert chemicals. It's something that could be fun to talk about more in the future, but again, I don't know a ton right now. It's also fun to think about how some of the evidence for like living things way back in Earth's timeline, we don't even have fossils of them. The fossil record is incomplete, but we can find chemical evidence of them. We can find like if we know there was oxygen here, for example, we know something had to have evolved that could convert CO2 into oxygen. I'm gonna see how this looks so far. Oh, I think I need it's about halfway around right now. We only know a relatively big amount about the things that are super close to us in the universe, like the other planets in our solar system, which, again, to us, super huge, but in astronomy terms, like tiny. If there's a black hole the size of our solar system, that's crazy dense. That's small for a black hole. So I wonder if how I could play that in a story is like we know a lot about the animals that are close to us, but if you go further out, we don't know what's going on. So people are trying to find that stuff out, but obviously you got to rein that in when it gets dangerous. I got to get more yarn. Kind of like how the further you go out to look at animals, again in the ocean, the weirder they look because they don't live in environments anything like ours. So they don't look like us. They don't look like our animals. We know a lot about other planets, so maybe in a story that could be like other islands. Maybe there's other islands out there, but humans don't live on them. Something that is really different about the ocean and space is in the ocean, there's life like everywhere. We just don't get it. Well, we get some of it, but we don't get a lot of it. Whereas if you look at our solar system, most of it doesn't have life in it. There's obviously the whole matter of Mars, but if you look at, say, Uranus or Neptune, most of the things we find interesting there are phenomena, not like living things. And that's not necessarily what I want to do, I don't think. But then you get to like their moons, and some of them have the building blocks for life, the chemical building blocks. We might not sew this on today because it's taking a while to make, but we can definitely do it next time. Let's see how well this fits. Okay, we're closer to being done. This is gonna take so much pinning because it goes like back and forth. I don't know if it's supposed to do that, but that's what happens when I make popcorn. So here it is. I'm definitely not an expert on it, but it's interesting to learn about how stars have to go through all these cycles to make different elements. Like they start with really light elements and then they start going through heavier elements until they get to iron, and then they generally cannot do that. And that's how we got a lot of the chemicals and metals and stuff that we have today. It's interesting to learn about like mollusks, creatures that live in shells. Because if you or I saw a blob, we would just be like, well, it's a blob. It's probably not alive. But that's what a lot of creatures are, is blobs effectively, and they live in a shell because they're soft. They need to protect themselves. I heard once that coconut crabs are just like hermit crabs, but they got too big and couldn't fit in shells anymore. I don't know if that's true, but that's really cool if it is. Don't know exactly how they do the thing with the door. You know how a lot of alive shelled animals, they have a little door on the opening of the shell. I want to know how they do that because those obviously aren't there when you find just the shell, so that must mean it's part of the animal, but I don't know how that works. I think I see a lot of aliens that just look kind of like blobs too, and I wonder why that is. Like, oops, hold on. Like, I feel like if we found interstellar life, it would be a lot smaller, but it would have kind of an amorphous shape. Only I see, especially as a kid, I would see like alien designs that are like the size of a human and they're just like a sentient blob. Okay. Ta-da! That should be it for today. I'm trying not to push my hand too hard because it does not, especially this hand where I hold it. I have a bad habit of going overboard, but this was really fun. So next time we meet up, we should be sewing this on.